Prophet of Time by Joyce Lee. Chapter 5. Kayla finished packing the belongings on her desk and set the bag on the bed. The sunlight peeking through the shutters made the place feel like a prison. The desk was cleared of inkwell, pen, and paper. She'd stowed the lavender bedsheets, blanket, and pillow in the small closet in the corner, leaving the room bare and lifeless. The scratched and chipped wood from Damon's surprise drills and a few very real scuffles littered the room. Kayla would not miss this sanctuary. Fear, excitement, relief, all of it flooded through her body, and she swayed before catching herself on the edge of the desk. Sky walked up beside her, his face set in stone as he shifted the travel bag on his shoulder. She took a deep breath and straightened before turning to examine her companion. Sky was her crutch in this journey. Before he came into her life, she never had the confidence or strength to stand tall, or as tall as she physically could, despite hurting. If only she could contribute as much to his life.
"Are you sure you don't want us to visit your brothers on the way out of town?"
Kayla asked. It was another reason they wanted to leave today. Sky's brothers took the day off work and slept in before their noon classes. As much as she'd tried, Kayla still couldn't get into a rhythm with the rest of Sky's family. Though she enjoyed visiting them, a part of her shielded her heart from opening up to them as she'd done with Sky, and it showed.
They're more than ready to shove me out the door. I'm sure they'll miss their sleep more than they'll miss me.
Kayla knew that wasn't true. Sky's brothers loved him, and although they bickered, they stood united when it came to ensuring that each family member was happy. The love they bore each other was unconditional and not tainted by apprehension or outrage. They were the closest Kayla had to normality.
"If you repeat that a few more times, maybe I'll believe you. Now, shall we?"
With a mocking flourish and a bow that almost hid the half-smile on Sky's face, he waved her on first. Kayla huffed.
"You know that's as far as you can go with that around me. I'm not some cerulean lady in need of tending."
Of course.
The words lingered in the air, the silent,
My lady.
almost tangible, as he followed her out of the room. There were never many people around the compound these days. The need for tutors and caregivers had waned over the years, and the lack of guests in the most recent months had left only the De Sola family and their companions to breathe life into the estate. The halls were silent as they wound their way to the parlor. Kayla's eyes landed on her father, Celia, Damon, and the respective companions of the latter two. Kayla smiled at them and walked down the line of well-wishers. Helen's stoic expression did not waver as she clasped wrists with Kayla in the ceremonial warrior's gesture of greeting and farewell. They nodded to each other, but before Kayla let go, she pulled Helen close.
"Instead of punishing Damon for something he has no knowledge of, why don't you talk to him? If you're not willing to work with him, there is no point in remaining his companion."
Helen's eyes narrowed at Kayla's whispered words, but nothing more was said between them. If Kayla was able to do one thing to effect change and help Damon either repair his relationship or move on, she would. But it was ultimately Helen and Damon's actions that would seal their fate. The concern in Damon's eyes was not lost on Kayla when she stepped over to him. Not even a trace of his trademark grin settled on his face. That almost had Kayla worried. Before he could speak, Celia came between them. Alan was the shadow by her side. When Kayla's eyes met Alan's, time slowed, and she blinked as she tried to extricate herself from the impending vision. She read something in the shift of his eyes, the warning displacement in the lines of his face. A surreal scene filled her mind. It was a place she had seen once before.
Alan trudged through the flat, frozen tundra, trying to find enough shelter to start a fire with his dwindling supply of twigs and moss. The landscape was covered in ice and snow, and the distant howl of wolves mixed with the high winds sent a shiver down his spine. Through the terror and pain, his physical and mental struggles, the terrible and sharp feeling of loss, and the inevitability of death made him want to give up everything. He knew the signs. If he couldn't find a deep enough area to create a snow cave, he would be trapped in a...
Sky's touch was like a rope jerking her from her sight, but she was too dazed to realize what was going on. When her companion had shaken her back to the present, Alan had already moved from her line of sight. Full awareness of her surroundings was slow in coming. Sky was in front of Kayla, their faces level. He grounded her with his vivid green eyes. The haze of white from the sight faded, and everything in front of her became clear.
Breathe.
Sky rubbed her arms and brought her back to the present. The inexplicable cold faded the longer he held her. She took in a shaky breath and closed her eyes. When she opened them, she extricated herself from Sky's embrace and turned so that her gaze immediately found Alan's. It was a vision of the past, she knew. Alan hailed from the cold tundra in northern Hukanda. Aside from a rare instance of sight, she knew very little about him. Even now, he was a mystery. Alan held out a hand, and she took it. He did not need to ask what she saw. A mutual understanding swept through them.
Cold, wasn't it?
His eyes seemed to ask the question as an unfamiliar warmth crept up her arm to dispel the lingering chill. She looked down at their clasped wrists and felt his power, his magic. Then he surprised her with a soft recitation in his deep, resonant voice.
Born in the darkest time of night, prophet who sees and shares all plights, with hair of ebony and eyes of midnight, they can be so very cold, yet burn so bright. The sacred duties of the gods call to thy care, so thou can be a guide, so that all may beware.
There was a long pause as she processed the words and tried to ignore the eerie feeling of being watched by invisible eyes.
Is this something I should have studied?
I would be surprised if you did.
Celia said, pulling Kayla in for a quick, almost dutiful embrace.
It is a passage from a book only found in the temples. If you are interested, explore a few of them before you come back.
Alan's expression was blank, almost detached as he spoke. Kayla tilted her head to the side in contemplation before nodding. She took the rhyme to heart. The word prophet, especially, made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. Celia and Alan moved away, leaving a perturbed Damon glaring at them. Kayla was almost certain something had happened between her two older siblings while she'd been stuck in her vision. It was only when Kayla cleared her throat that his expression softened and he turned to her.
It's going to be quiet without you around,
Damon said, clasping her proffered wrist, and she gave him her best reassuring smile. Then the warmth in her expression turned to surprise as he dragged her into a bone-crushing embrace.
Let go, you brutish bear!
Kayla said, thumping his back while gasping for air. Her toes barely touched the ground as he straightened and took her with him. Damon chuckled and gently placed her down. Kayla attempted to stifle her laughter, but she gave up. The sound her brother made was infectious, and the tension she felt from his disconcerting gaze broke. Her cheeks flushed in embarrassment as the laughter subsided.
Don't go looking for trouble, all right?
You should tell Trouble to not come looking for me.
He grinned and nudged her down the line. When she stood in front of her father, she found deep, sorrowful eyes and wrinkles of worry on his face. She took his large hand in hers and gave it a comforting squeeze before jumping up to wrap her arms around his ample neck. He held her as he always did, with reverence and delicacy, like the rarest of jewels. She drew away and frowned at the sadness growing in his eyes.
Father, I know you're not happy about this,
she said.
All I can do is assure you that Sky and I will look after each other. You taught us to be strong.
Your mother would have liked to see you off as well. She never had any doubts that you would want to find your own way.
Brandon said with a sigh.
I can only wish you well, my jewel.
Brandon hesitated and seemed to want to say something. Kayla waited, but he shook his head.
Be careful, Kayla. I will miss you.
And I you, Father.
Go with my blessing, my child. May the gods protect you from harm,
Brandon said. The group at large repeated the prayer to them, and she and Sky responded in kind. At last, Kayla began her journey without a second glance back.
Noah packed the provisions he would need for the journey to the Temple of Healing as he went over his mental list of chores. With the steady flow of priesthood information and the problems about the slavers continually demanding his attention, there was no reason for his mind to keep wandering to a surprisingly compassionate princess. It had been over a week since he met Leanne, and frustration seized him as he remembered the interaction. The process of building up his spy network to span continents was unthinkable and unnecessary, but he had Leanne's gold and was honor-bound to do her bidding with it. Emilia was meeting with a handful of other spies in the port city of Saline. Those who had to travel there were fluent in either the desolate islanders' Trajali or spoke the common Hukandan tongue. Emilia would distribute the coins to those best suited to thrive before they were sent off to build contacts and send a very specific message to Reynard de Sola of the Ruby Isle. He recalled Leanne's glass-blue eyes and arrogant determination to reach out to the man. It made him wonder what was so special about the islander.
Are you all right, Noah?
The voice broke through his thoughts and caught him unaware. He froze in the middle of stuffing some clothes into his pack and looked up. Dawn stood in front of him, and though she was keeping a calm facade, he knew that note of longing singing in her soft gaze. After she had walked out on him at the tavern weeks ago, they had been on shaky ground. Dawn had apologized to him, and he had done the same to her, telling her it was not meant to be. He had tried to convince her that with her father's disappearance, she was just lonely. Noah had offered his companionship and brotherly love, but that was all he could give.
My mind wanders. Don't let that concern you.
What has gotten into you? You didn't even hear me knock on your door. What makes you think you'll be able to travel the roads safely?
I won't be alone. I'm taking Travis with me. Out of the rest of the spies available, he's the most knowledgeable when it comes to the temples, and I'm sure he can convince the priests to let us look at their sacred texts. He's not bad with a blade either, so we'll be fine if any trouble comes our way.
And what is your purpose in going on this mission? You have others. Landon's just down the hall. He and Travis can go without you.
They don't know what to look for, Dawn.
And you do?
She asked with a scoff.
From what you've told me, nobody knows.
That spark of anger almost caused a smile to appear on Noah's lips. But he tamped down the urge and shook his head.
I cannot leave this task to those who do not have my knowledge. I am a gatherer and master of spies, Dawn Adler. Never forget that. I know what's best for my network, and sending a boy like Landon into the fray is not going to aid anybody. Emilia left 4 days ago. Olivia, Jensen, Molly and Matthew have their duties in the palace. Travis and I are the only two qualified for this job.
Dawn's brows furrowed.
Will you tell me what went on that day? You've been out of sorts ever since.
Which day?
He asked.
The day you met with that sponsor.
Her voice was filled with contempt.
I'm not a fool, Noah. You were ordered to go, and it's not like you to submit to demands.
Pulling everything together in a neat bundle, Noah looked into silver-gray eyes and shrugged.
I have not looked into temple law and how the gods work. I'm going to find out all I can about them. And if you must know, Pierre did not do a good job masquerading as my master. Besides, I need to talk with Travis alone. It turns out, Julia saved him from being one of Death's sacrifices before he came into the Guild of Life.
That was around the time she'd first been captured, Noah. You don't know what has happened between then and now.
That was true. He had made a mistake when he'd recruited Travis straight out of the guild and into his service as a spy. He hadn't asked the right questions.
That doesn't change the fact that I need to have a more extensive conversation with him.
Dawn hung her head as she composed herself.
There are times when I relive the night you and Julia led the priesthood away from Landon and me. Do you still hold out hope that she's alive?
Noah mentally groaned as he straightened to cinch his sword belt around his waist. So that was why the girl had suddenly demanded to know his plans. She sought to take advantage of him. He held her gaze and spoke with as much care as he could manage.
Our situations are different. Your father is most likely dead, Dawn. I don't mean to sound callous. He was like a father to me, but he's gone, just like all the other men captured by the priesthood.
No, he's not dead. I refuse to believe it.
Knowing full well that it would be difficult to curb her beliefs when she thought he purposefully antagonized her, he stayed silent for a while, not so much concerned as exasperated. Dawn was a dreamer, one who did not want to break into reality, as he had done so long ago. Her red hair whipped around her face as she shook her head, and bright eyes shone with unshed tears. He hesitated before putting his hand on her shoulder, offering her all the comfort he could.
We'll talk about him when I return.
But how long do you expect to be gone?
Travis and I will leave for the Temple of Healing in the morning. We'll be gone for a week or so, depending on how fast we can go through their sacred texts. Can you and the others take care of the nest in my absence?
Dawn nodded, and Noah pressed his lips to the top of her brow, just as Julia had done to him countless times when they were children. In her position, he would feel the same. In fact, Noah knew how Dawn felt. He had lost a loved one, and only power and determination had soothed him. Maybe that would help the girl as well, and he knew just the outlet they all needed to do it. He thought again of those crystal blue eyes, and the gentle scent of rosewater wafting from an impossibly stubborn woman. He had to remember, though, that even the most beautiful rose had wicked thorns. Best to just avoid them as much as possible.
I'll tell you what, Dawn. When I come back, I'll teach you swordplay as your father taught me. Spread the word. I'm going to take a page from the Desolate Islanders, and teach anybody I can to take up the blade. Men, women, and children. The guild can no longer afford to be ignorant of battle.